Afide Toru Hamzu, and thank you all for joining us for this month's General Assembly. As you know, Independent Guåhan, we try to have an assembly every month where we tackle a different topic. So for today, we're going to be talking about intergenerational decolonization and looking at it, especially in lieu of the Davis v. Guam decision. So today with me, we have quite a few panelists. This month's GA will be a little bit different. Usually what we do is we'll have we'll honor our maga'taotao, then we'll do the main topic for this month's GA, and then we'll have a model nation. However, we decided that this month, in lieu of the model nation, we decided to do more of a panel format. So this month we'll be honoring Uncle Ed Benavente. And so he was actually the inspiration behind our maga'taotao. And the reason why was because he felt it was important that each of us understands kind of historical figures and their contribution to Guam and the Northern, and to the Marianas overall. And so he wrote a book called I Manmaynanata. And so he just kind of wanted to give us all a history of kind of the movers and shakers within the decolonization movement. So joining us to honor Uncle Ed is Mama Jill Benavente and also his daughter Amber Benavente. But before they begin, we always open up our General Assembly with the Inafresi. And so Uncle Ed's grandchildren, who are featured here in the video, Ha'ani, Sinahi, Ninadzi, Fa'una, and Rai, they all came together to do their rendition of the Inafresi. Thank you. I know for some that might have been a little bit muted in the beginning. However, technical difficulties, we apologize this month. Zoom just recently updated its version, so we're still trying to figure out some of the technicalities. Uncle Ed's grand, they were also nice enough to create, to do a benediction for us for this month. And so we'd also like to feature that video as well. I know we're having some trouble with the video on our end, so we can actually move forward and we can get to that part a little bit later. So thank you all for joining us. Independent Guåhan, for many of you who may know, we are a community group that seeks to empower the Chamoru people to reclaim our sovereignty as a nation. And we're inspired by the strength of our ancestors, and with love for future generations, we educate and unify all who call our island home to build a sustainable and prosperous independent future. Independent Guåhan, we've been doing this GA for about 4 years now. We try to do one every month. And so this month, the reason why it's a lot is the reason why we had chosen this topic was because of the recent Davis v. Guam decision. So many of you may have seen the letter circulating from Finogi. And so what we did, we had undersigned along with 30 community groups to ask our legislators to come together to go through the international courts as a way for us to move forward our fight for self-determination. And as you can see here, we have groups from all over Guam. We have community groups that come straight from the University of Guam, community groups that are dedicated to creating Chamorro-based learning resources. And so really that kind of personifies what our topic is today, is that decolonization doesn't just have to look like one thing. We can all contribute to decolonization in many different forms, and we can utilize each of our talents to move our fight forward. So in addition to the letter, we also have an ongoing podcast of Finatsu. You can see this on the Finatsu podcast on Facebook, and we have quite a few episodes. We have more than 100 going. So if you want to tune in, they just had one yesterday where they talked with a collective group called Para Todos Hit. And so that group was dedicated to helping a lot of us who are struggling financially and even with our mental health during this COVID lockdown. And so I would like to move on to maga'taotao. So every month we try to feature somebody who has dedicated their life to decolonization, who may even have, so before we begin with Uncle Ed, our video's up, and so we'd like to share with you all the bendition made by his grandchildren. Sizuas Ma'asi to the Benavente family, and thank you especially to Mama Jill and to Amber for joining us today. So today we're honoring Uncle Ed Benavente. And so Uncle Ed has always been an inspiration to us, especially in Independent Guåhan, because not only of his work with Nasion Chamorro, but even beyond the community group itself, he made it his life legacy to educate Chamorros about the fight for decolonization by establishing organizations like helping to establish the Chamorro Land Trust, and also doing it within the classroom. Uncle Ed taught for a long time at JFK High School, and so I think, well, one of our panelists was actually a student of his, and he'll talk about that a little bit too during his presentation. And so one of Uncle Ed's most famous quotes is, he says, "I may not see decolonization in my lifetime, but I leave this world knowing the next generation will continue to fight for the rights of our people." And he very much embodied that quote. He was always sure that people understood what decolonization meant. And he was also sure to prepare the children of Guam and the youth of our island to really push this fight forward. So I'd like to welcome Mama Jill Benavente and Amber Benavente. If you guys could, we'd love to hear you share your story of Uncle Ed, and also to, inspire the youth to continue the fight for decolonization. Thank you for joining us.
Happy day, and thank you, Sanamasi. Mom will talk a bit about Tata's work as far as his activism, and a bit about Nasion, and then I'll kind of just play off of that. So, Mom, you want to talk about
Sanamasi, Independent Guåhan, for honoring Ed today. Sanamasi. He was a musician, educator, and an activist. He was Maga'låhi of Nasion until he became director for ancestral lands and Commission on Decolonization. Nasion was formed actually as an action group to go head on with the various environmental and social justice issues. The Chamoru Land Trust was actually fought in 2 administrations. The first administration was to actually implement the law, which was already law. And the second, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. Second protest was to actually implement the rules and regulations for the land trust so that they can issue out lands to our people. With all of this issue made us realize that the status of our colonized island, we had no say. This is why, as Nasion, we advocate the decolonization and self-determination for Chamorros. In all the work that he has done, he did take a lot of pride in the fact that our next generation will continue the work when he's gone. Yes. We did some others. I mean, I can't remember. We did a lot under Nasion. One basically was with Greenpeace. We had to protest of some vessel coming in with contaminated soils and heading to our sisters and brothers in Bilao. So we protest against that because that would hurt the people of Bilao. There's many others, and we can go on forever speaking about all the things that he has done.
Yeah, I think in all of Tata's work, everything, his work as far as advocating for our clean environment, down to our the injustices, the whole with everything with the militarization,
Terminations
yeah,
of our lands.
Everything he did, of course, with the future in mind. He was a musician, an educator, an author, an activist, a father, a husband, a Maga'låhi, and a son of Guåhan, most importantly. I said I wasn't gonna cry.
Yeah.
But in everything he did, he was always educating. He would teach beyond the curriculum, beyond the surface of what was built to colonize our way of thinking. He had a way of engaging with the youth, guiding them into their own political consciousness. He did that by instilling pride in them, reminding them who they are as Chamorros and who their ancestors were. He was decolonizing their way of thinking, and he was patient with it. He was always open to dialogue, whether it was in a group setting, a classroom setting, through his music. Everything was about the issues that we face here on the island. I think with Tata, education, the door to education was always open when we were talking about decolonization. And I think that was truly the takeaway with Tata. His work at the Cultural Center, his work as a teacher, his conscious music, the books that he's written, that is truly the underlying takeaway, is that education, as far as everything that we have gone through, is important. You're gonna get a napkin. He left behind a legacy, and he also left behind a reminder that it's important to know our history in order to understand where we're going, where our Maga'låhi is headed to. It's important for us to consistently educate ourselves and engage in the issues and come to a understanding of where we need to go, and that our current status isn't working for us. The movement that Tata has set, and not just him, he got a lot of inspiration. He always tells me, he got a lot of inspiration from Dr. Underwood when he was attending the university. So he looked to other organized groups like OPIR and those that came before Nasion. And I don't think he ever realized that he also set, the tone for the newer organizations and those who are coming into their consciousness, and those who want to be in the activism work, that they look up to him as well, that he is a mentor too. And even in his passing, he's still very much present. His work is still very much present.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know Uncle Ed, he's been an inspiration to many of us, because his fight for decolonization has always taken on many different facets, whether it was active demonstrations through Nasion Chamoru, where they were trying to get policy to happen and were trying to influence the community of Guam and also lawmakers to put Chamoru rights first. And then also him being in the classroom and even music being his medium for decolonization. Uncle Ed really showed all of us that we can all find our own talents and push decolonization in that way. So I thank you very much for being with us and for sharing that with us. And I also want to tell anyone if they'd like to see an interview that Uncle Ed had done with the Honga Mo'na project. He did an interview entirely in Chamoru, where he kind of talks about his oral history with Nasion and how those policies started to change when Nasion Chamoru, along with other community groups, came together to really get the island to collectively come forward and tell our legislators we need to have stronger policies, especially in terms of Chamoru rights. So thank you very much, Mama Jill Benavente, and also to Amber and to your kids. Those were beautiful videos, and maybe on the side we'll ask you if we can use them for future GAs. So thank you for joining us. And also keep in mind, at the end of the presentations, all of you will have a chance to ask questions to our panelists, and you can do that in our Facebook page. The video is live right now, and so you can go in there and just type in questions and comments, and then we'll address them as our Q&A opens up. So I'd like to move to the panel. So we have Senor Carlos Laguarnia. He's coming to join us from the Young Men's League of Guam. So YMLG is one of the oldest fraternal organizations in the island. I think a couple of years ago, they actually just finished celebrating their centennial anniversary. So congratulations to you. I mean, it's incredibly hard to keep an organization going, especially for that length of time. And many of you who are members of YMLG are incredibly influential within the island. And so Untitled Guåhan, I don't know whether or not you remember this, but you were actually my middle school teacher for band. I started out with, I think it was guitar, and then I was ambitious enough to try saxophone. And I was just in complete awe of the fact that you were able to move from instrument to instrument, because I am completely tone deaf, but you were patient, and trying to teach a bunch of 12-year-olds how to play instruments, I imagine, is not easy. And so you were incredibly inspirational, and I know your music also contributes to our decolonization movement. And I think you really do embody, like what we were saying about Uncle Ed, is that decolonization can look like many different things. We all use our talents to push this message forward, and also music. Music has a way of reaching all of us in many different ways. It doesn't reach us in the same way academics do. A lot of us will remember lyrics for decades, right? And so when you have powerful songs that talk about decolonization, it's something that stays with you. So Untitled Guåhan, we welcome you, and then I'll introduce our next two panelists right after your presentation. Thank you for joining us.
Programa por Independent Guåhan General Assembly by Huquentus Gifinota Sagay mas Sustancia dan mas fitmi na soko dan sinenti. Si kalau laguana na anhu samasagadzo dan ni familyaku ya sagwao si Rosemary dan ni Jess na pamaguan mami gizamongmong. Apay sinzo si Sinoran Lola Young Guerrero para by Huquentus pudi na soko dan hafasia Sina hutsogi para tatsonic itetsu decolonization. Por anay maestro Chamoru dan musical. Apmam na tempo dan dandero dan China loki. Sumasanaw jo loki gi grupo ni Nalahin Guåhan mapananan YMLG. Sama punta jo para bay uge ilui I komitean inadahin I kultura. Este na nun gos importante sa necessity lingwahi ibandan edukasyon. DOE programan student na Finot Chamoru. Kadasakan inasisisti siya jangin matutuhun imes Chamoru. Necessity loki otu siya na grupo ni mapisisigi dan mapraktika I kultura dan lingwahi. Zangiti insegui esti sempi kumematay I kultura dan lingwahi za mga hit na masok esti na tanalala I finota I kultura I lingwahita. Kimapos niya nasakan na manaunaw ham ni inet nun Lalahin Guåhan zani fanogi na matsa tafanui tautau I kontin Amerikano na ti mamapu I plebiscite para I Chamoru. Jata sigiha manispia hapat taimanu ta na posible I guinifita por I plebiscite. Gof importante na tatsonik esti I fanogi coalition ni ideia ni tautao para ta inspira I diritsota dan I los Estados Unidos. Sa hafa, destiman halum I finenina na estranhero zaman mahatmihit ni Chess na tautao outro banda, por exemplo, espanhol e japonês dan americano, timan manaihit bosta para tasangan I managahit hafa malagota na politiko Estados. Hunggan imanamko mafatinas I Organic Act loman magugudi ahit ni kanaita dati sina man matautsung hit ni officialis zatasangan sangani hafa minaulik paritaw-tawta ni todo I maneran a reglamenton politika. Kumekinturzo za nilaihiu za Guåha idealnya ni Taimano ta convinci e Congresso los Estados Unidos za accepta he todos existem ni afanuit si lola existem todos si organization non megigation organization lo mais bonito monza mangai todos si na família tagi na família e masya Laguna Association na Puti Association Long Guerrero Association Benavente Association tagano siya na ehemplo siya nisita na ta deklara hit na mangginin isainata ihagata si Maga'låhi agwalin si Maga'låhi matapang si Maga'låhi pulau dan todo outro siya naman Maga'låhi sa ilegnya i-organic act na inatibong taotao Guåhan puro hahit mesklaw na Amerikano Chamoru, Japanese, Korean, Chino, Filipino, at otro siya na taotao, otro na Nasion. Kapan forma manayna na kanso, azgi ideya, sa puro ha na napididun Chamoru siya taygi, kastaw na panalza na tutori na pamilya todo. Guåha naman familia esta paugo ni maneen nun para umasilebra ina aniya naging sina maneen nun todo esti na manay na konso za kada untaw-taw ni gostungo horizonta self-determination o makumbinsi na para uminaulekta esti pues mas manmedgod hit estagui ukekitsogui para izon mami lagwa na reunion na komite ya wazon mami no reunion na na lagwa na reunion gade pamilyan mami gade the mas di meet ham na members the man medgura mestagin manetulam dos jay the megagad basaw na di pamilyan mami the manihuram na jangin sina incumbincy pamilyan maisi kusina convinci familia mami para masuporte esti na causa pues Guåha transata para tana posible zota political status mas megay na suporte gini ni familia fuera di otro siya na grupo mas manbed good hit pinuas difunto Benavente ifno Chamoru ti zanginti utaka i decolonization gi lina lahu lausina Udingo esti na tano za hutumu ha na iman mamayla na taw-tawta ni man hobin para utsinenik idiritsota ni minaulik para itaw-tawta. Esta aqui. Jesus masi.
Jesus masi, Senor Laguarnia pare finot mo. And so I love what you were saying. You were telling us how YMLG has done many different events with communities throughout Guåhan. And so you guys worked to build different sort of workshops. You guys were also a very prominent figure at the Finogi March last year. And I like that you were saying that one great act of decolonization that we can all do is not just for community organizations to sign on to the letter, but also for families to do it. And that's a great idea. If many of you remember during the Finogi March, right before we, while they were announcing that the march was going to happen, Dr. Underwood unveiled that huge banner where he said, Underwoods for self-determination. And so that would be a great idea if many of you can reach out to your families, because as Senor Laguarnia was saying, when he would go to reunions, you'll notice that you have hundreds of family members, and these are people you may not see on a regular basis, but these are people that we're all tied to. And so trying to get our families to come out and to support is a very important idea, because as Senor Laguarnia was saying, that although we have made steps to decolonization, I mean, there's so much more that has to be done. We were able to do the Organic Act, but he brought in that great metaphor is that although the Organic Act was signed, it was pretty much done while they were holding our hands, right? This wasn't something that we were allowed to be very independent about and to be able to go out and kind of just do on our own or to even shape on our own. So thank you, Senor Laguatnia, for your words, and thank you for the work that you do with YMLG and with your music. You're very inspirational to a lot of us, and so it's great to see people doing this work and coming forward. So next we have Samantha Marley Barnett. And so Sam, she is over at UH Manoa. Well, she's currently in Guam, but she's studying at UH Manoa. She's a PhD student in political science. And so Sam, as many of you may have seen, she was one of the representatives for the press release for the Finogi Coalition. And so she's doing great work there. She's also a Kulu member here at Independent Guåhan. And so Sam is going to share with us a bit how people can get involved either here in Guam or even while they're in the diaspora to get involved in decolonization work.
Half the day, everyone. I just wanted to thank all of our speakers so far for sharing stories about Uncle Ed. I think it's incredibly beautiful, and I feel really blessed that we have a space like this to be able to share stories and learn from our ancestors. And just thinking about it more, I think a lot of what Uncle Ed did through his life and through his work is really teach us how to build and how to raise a movement. I wasn't mentored by him directly, but I was mentored by so many people that he poured so much of his love and stories into. So kind of throughout the past 2 years of my adult life, being involved in Independent Guåhan and I'm always hearing stories from my kind of scientists in the movement now, sharing about how much he shaped their life and the impacts that he had on them. And I just think he also really instilled in our people how important mentorship is to building a movement, how important it is to understand where we come from, and that as we go about this work and as exhausting as it can be to kind of push back against these continued setbacks and continued colonization, that we're really not alone in this. We have a whole history of people who have stood and sacrificed their lives before us. And as Uncle Ed kind of reassures us, we can be really confident in knowing that there will be generations after us who will continue the work of his life. And this is really just the work of our generation that's continued. I think it's really beautiful that our movement too has become this place where we can speak with each other across time. And through Uncle Ed's work, we know so many of the stories of our ancestors during the Spanish-Boer Wars, particularly, who sacrificed their lives to make sure that we are here today and that we still have stories to tell. And just knowing that we will continue to learn about him and everything that he did for us just really gives me a lot of reassurance and grounding as we go forward. But in terms of getting involved, I can kind of talk about my involvement in what that's looked like for the past few years and then avenues going forward. So I've been involved with organizing trips to testify before the United Nations Fourth Committee, and that's the space within the United Nations where they address all non-self-governing territories, including Guam. And so in those trips that we organize with Independent Guåhan, we testify about challenges that our island is facing, and we also meet with other international partners and people in the international community. And just connecting it back to Uncle Ed too, I remember at one of those meetings, we met with a group of, I think it was all women Puerto Rican activists. And one of them was older, and she was explaining to me about how she's been in their movement for liberation for her entire life, and how I think she said that we just can't get tired as we're doing this work, and that our colonizers are waiting for us to get tired, and that's not something that we can give into. But I think through Uncle Ed's work, he's shown us that it's not really about our individual actions, but just knowing that even after we pass away, that it will continue beyond our lifetime. And I think ways that people can get involved now, as we've talked about before, like the biggest challenge that we're facing now is the Davis case and also the US military buildup. And so I think we can look at the Davis case as just this another opportunity for us to spread awareness and to honor all the work of the people who have come before us. The Finogi Coalition, like Fran was mentioning earlier, we're spearheading a bunch of new efforts to get our elected officials involved and to show that their support is behind this. I think we have a petition going on now at change.org where people can go online and pledge their support. So it's really important that we build on the momentum of the Finogi March, where we had over 2,000 people in the streets showing their support for self-determination, and show that, as we've done in the past, we can demonstrate this sustained and continued effort. So we'll be coming out with more ways that people can get involved. I think it's important too to just keep trying to find the stories of people who have done this work. So attending these GAs is a really great opportunity, and taking the time to really educate yourself and see how you can do that for other people as well.
Thank you, Sam. I'm glad that you brought up the oral history thing, because for a lot of us, I mean, especially when we were in our class, when we go through Guam history, a lot of the time it's very filtered down into what our colonial governments had done. And so we don't really get to hear the voices of our people and kind of our resistance movements. And so for somebody kind of looking at from the outside in, they might think that Chamorros weren't very vocal when it came to telling people what we wanted and how we wanted our rights to, or what we wanted our rights to look like. So that's great. And thank you for mentioning the petition. I think because we're in a lockdown, it's really hard to do very active demonstrations. And so that's a great way to get people involved. And these are things they can do now from a very safe distance. So thank you, Sam. And so next we have Leo Orsini. So Leo is a student over at Stanford University. And he is going to share with us a bit about how he engages in decolonization. Leo is also a member of the Independent Guåhan Kulu. And so thank you, Leo, for being here with us.
Thank you, Fran. I just want to say also, just as Sam did, thank you all for your presentations, your stories of Uncle Ed. I was a student of Uncle Ed at the University of Guam. Uncle Ed was a mentor to me. He wrote my letters of recommendation for college. And so I know him largely in the capacity as an educator to young people and within the classroom. And speaking of the classroom, I want to perhaps talk about Uncle Ed's position within the classroom, his role as an educator and teacher. He truly transformed the space of the classroom as a lesson ground for our culture. I remember when I first walked into our first day of class at UOG, he would go around the class and ask each student their ethnicity, and then further along their family tree. And then he would make genealogical connections, links. He'd be like, oh, like I know, you know, your uncle helped someone I know, and you know how it goes. He makes these genealogical links and brings us closer to him. And it really engaged, I think, each student in his classrooms in a very intimate sort of fashion. He saw every student. You know, in typical Islander Chamorro fashion, he would always have his snack. He would have these Navy biscuits he would bring into class from a mom and pop store and offer anyone in the class. You know, whenever you bring food in the classroom, you just have to offer anyone, but he really practiced a lot of these Chamorro cultural protocols. He was a really refreshing figure within the classroom of academia as someone who is so culturally girded in our traditions. And I think within the classroom, and something that I've been able to reflect on further, having had Uncle Ed as a teacher and as a mentor, was that he had an uncanny ability to inspire his students, to inspire the classroom, to engage us into learning our language, our traditions, particularly our history. And not only within Guam or the Marianas, but Uncle Ed was also concerned about the histories of other Pacific Islanders throughout Oceania. And so his cosmology really centered and celebrated Pacific Islanders, not only within the homeland, within Guam and the CNMI, but also throughout the Pacific. I remember there's always this quote that he said, because he also taught Chamorro. He would say, we haven't lost our language. We've merely forgotten how to speak our mother tongue. So it wasn't about losing our language or a dying narrative of our language. It was about us training our language to become familiar, or training our tongue to become familiar with our language again. It was always a perspective on our culture and tradition, not of one that is lost or unreconcilable or unredeemable, but rather something that that is within us, that we know it is within us. And he really inspired that type of action, that call to action in each of us. And I think that Mama Jill also displays the same sentiment when it comes to the cultural arts that Uncle Ed was also an advocate for. And I think that they both see the cultural arts as a source of political action. You know, Uncle Ed would encourage students to engage in chants, to engage in other traditions that we have lost and revive, that we are constantly evolving. And he made these, you know, seemingly desperate activities such as chanting or canoe building or weaving as something that's actually a very important political action that has political commentary and political consequence with ideas about decolonization in Guam. I also want to say that his mentorship was also, I feel like the word mentorship doesn't do enough justice to how Uncle Ed practiced mentorship. I feel that his mentorship was perhaps a genealogical mentorship by nature. It was not only of our immediate relationships and our immediate relations to other peoples, but rather a mentorship that that took into response the genealogy of our people's history. It was always about a legacy, about continuing a cause, about completing a cycle. And so Uncle Ed, I think, practiced a type of mentorship that was intimate, that was genealogical, and that was also just very indicative of how Chamorro's mentor the next generation. And he really practiced that in order to sustain a legacy within these political spheres. And so, you know, I think if we were to take away two things from Uncle Ed's, my experience with Uncle Ed, it was that he taught us that the cultural arts, our cultural arts, can be a source of political action, and that seeking out mentorships from elders is crucial.
Thank you, Leo. That's a really important idea to get across, because for a lot of us, we have access to elders, but we don't think to kind of reach out in that way. So for many of you who maybe live with your grandparents or have older parents, you can ask them to speak to you in Chamorro. You can talk to them about their oral histories. You can even ask them maybe if they know how to weave, or if they know how to fish, or if they know how to make sort of any sort cultural artifact and things like that. You can ask them to teach you, and you can develop that relationship. Leo, I remember you were part of the Master Apprentice program that the University of Guam had for quite some time. And I know not only did you learn language, but you were also learning the art of weaving too at the same time. And so that's really stuff that we can be doing now. And Leo, your message actually goes straight into the first question that we have. So just a reminder, you can continue to add questions on that you would like our panel to discuss. And so one of the first questions that came out is, what message would Maga'låhi Ed have for the leaders of today? So if anybody would like to speak to that, Mama Jill or Amber, if there's something that, you know, like a takeaway that people would want to walk away with after today about Uncle Ed.
I think Leonard, Leo, sorry, Leo Dispenza. I think he touched on that, you know. I think linking with those who are already active in this work is one way to move forward in in this movement towards decolonization, mentorship, of course, and also the importance of knowing the history of our colonization, like that span. I think that's really important in those today. The connection to our menamkus is very important. Everything, I think, everything is linked.
Is that the question?
Yes. Sorry, Mom's trying to read that.
I'm sorry, I'm keep them here. I'm
Mom's trying to read it while I'm trying to answer.
Yes, yes.
But I think Leo.
Well,
explain it.
basically really is, if you learn your past, you learn traditional ways, and you learn to be more independent. You learn through the arts of weaving, Leo, you learn to be concerned about the trees that are the materials that you use. So that would keep, you would try to be more concerned, and then you want to do something about that. You know, it's more or less, you treasure what's on our natural resources. So you want to protect it. So you learn all these things when you learn traditional skills and more, and much more.
I think we also have to remind ourselves that all of these things, as far as like fishing and weaving and all, you know, chanting, or, you know, they all are part of who we are. It's 4,000 years. It's our connection to that. It's our identity. It's, you know, those are the ways in which we are forms. That's forms of decolonization. We're decolonizing because we're practicing those forms. Those existed before we were ever colonized. And it also it shows our resiliency, because we practice these practices today. Like Leo said, Tata always said that our language is never lost, right? It has remained for almost 4,000 years.
Actually, throughout colonization.
And throughout colonization. So it just shows how resilient we are as a people, and and that we can exist beyond colonization, you know, the confines of it. And so I think for the leaders of today, you know, always, I think in everything you do, as a mom, you know, the kids, as much as I could, you know, I can, you know, I speak to them in Chamoru. I involve them in many things to make sure that they never forget their identity, because it's all linked to each other, and it's a reminder for us that, you know, we are very special people. You know, we have existed before colonization, and we can very much exist after. Yes.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add on to that? I know, Leo, you mentioned a lot of, you know, your relationship with Uncle Ed and how he kind of, through his work, gave you insight into what he would say today, especially because he was always, you know, he was always supportive of talking to youth about decolonization. He wasn't shy about kind of just saying, oh, this is, you know, this is the issue and things like that. He would actually engage in very meaningful conversation with the people that he would talk to.
Yeah, I think piggybacking on what Mama Jill's been talking about, I think Uncle Ed would be very concerned about the environments. I think he would be very concerned about the issue of climate change on Guam, the destruction of coconut trees on Guam by the rhinoceros beetle. I think Uncle Ed would be very concerned about you know, the role of the military on the environment. And then also, I think Uncle Ed would be very concerned about our culture and the traditions that are being practiced and are intended to continue and be passed on to the next generation. I think he'd be very concerned about all of those things.
Thank you. And so for the second question, Yeah, they're actually asking about the Finatu podcast that happened yesterday. So Para Todos Hit is a collective community group that comes together. And so one thing they kind of wanted to rally around was a rent and mortgage freeze, just because a lot of our people are struggling to make those payments, especially because some have either been laid off or their hours have been cut. And so what they're asking is there was a solid discussion on material help for people versus just ideas. So they were asking, how can IG offer more material help to get their message across instead of just telling people about new ideas? So if anybody on the panel would like to speak to what maybe your organizations do in reaching out. So Sunyot Lagwatni, I know you mentioned a lot of what YMLG does to kind of directly outreach to the community, where you guys do working groups, and then you also do, I think it was consultation about Mesh Tomorrow, right, prior to the Mesh Tomorrow festivities.
Nasisisti todo i programa ni Chamoru na kada sakan na muzingi Mesh Chamoru an mapapaisin ng pabe nasisti siya no sa kada sakan ni na jujuda i Chamoru standi siya. Jang kontrol gua otol ki na grupo i universidad wazan ya no aji competition no locally este COVID-19 taza na no man malofan siya na programa na no siya todo siya mangai gigi ma sisi naman no pwede man amko siya ni man maguftungo siya apa isti na ikanalamtin ni kinota sa ni kultura ni praktiko sisi naman no chung sa eji social distancing no dan kita no ni man manamko no masasingan gi English address ne tambis bolok ki harsan no mano hu so solo gof preciso ha na mano hu so sai mas na to no siya lo ya de i programan YMLG loki guano no para pabenchegi put ilingwahi za para ben agofadahi na siguro na adahi i todo siya de leblo mafatinas que Chamoru programa de Chamoru Studies para mapega digital form de dispensa si lola sa da atunga po destilo para na siguro na todo i man hobe todo ni man Chamoru todo ni man malago man ezang ifno Chamoru sempre da man holum computer sempre sina man ezang za zangin za tatsoge jo sempre no mas azgi mas preciso na zang mami project para bem cumprir no ge este na mamaila na sakan da gosman ko family ni tau i wa mi uzina para betse este
Sujus Maasi Senor. And Sam, I know that you may have, or you have some ideas about how we can, better help with material versus or within Independent Guåhan.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to recognize that within Independent Guåhan and within the movement, we're not just talking about like lofty ideas, but that political status change and decolonization are really directly affected to the conditions of our everyday lives. Almost all the problems that our people face, including poverty and poor health outcomes, are really directly tied to our colonization, to the way that we don't have control over the way our land is used. We don't have the ability or a lot of the freedom to really grow our own food because so much of our land was stolen from us. We're experiencing a lot of the direct results of militarization, contamination. So really working for decolonization and for independence is doing work to change the material conditions of our lives. I think also in terms of a lot of the other challenges that our people are facing have really been highlighted by this pandemic. We're seeing a lot of the cracks in all of this. If Guåhan were an independent nation, it's possible that we wouldn't even be in this situation in the first place. We could have had more power to close our borders earlier, like other Pacific Island nations have done, where in that case, maybe we wouldn't have seen any cases or any deaths at all. Also, independence and decolonization, I believe, are really key to our people mobilizing out of poverty and a lot of the oppression that we're experiencing because of things like the Jones Act and other just like colonial economic policies. We're really not able to control our own economy in a way that works for us and empowers our people. So the work that we do for decolonization is really just an investment in a belief that our people deserve better and that it's kind of all of our responsibilities to advocate for those change. Decolonization is a really holistic solution to almost all of the challenges our people face because of this increased militarized violence and because of the way that our political status positions us in the world.
Thank you, Sam. And I know Mama Jill and Amber, if you guys can speak a little bit to what Sagan Cultura and Chamoru does with its partnership with Guåhan Sustainable Culture, because I know that flyer has been going around about the Farm Fresh Produce Pilot Program. So I know that's something SKC has been helping with.
Yes, so we have been partnered with Guåhan Sustainable Cultures. You know, the proceeds go towards farmers, and then also they provide bags of produce for those families that are in need. I mean, this whole, you know, this everything that Guåhan Sustainable is doing, and not just with them, and then also the farmers, it's kind of bringing to light, you know, the current issues that we're having, and then also reminding us that it's very important for us to sustain ourselves. I mean, we were at one, you know, sustainable people, and then and knowing that majority of our food sources are from not from here, you know, and with the support of our farmers, I think farmers and our fishermen have a really big job, you know, and they're very important to us because they are who we are, you know, they are the movement of us decolonizing. They are a reminder that we can sustain ourselves as a people, you know, and in this pandemic, it's the amount of people that have been coming up to the center to get their produce, you know, it just goes to show that, you know, that the importance of our farmers and our fishermen here on the island, and that we need to move towards a more sustainable lifestyle, you know, be it for our health and for our people. And it's,
well, I think too, mostly is because we have a lot of produce coming from everywhere else in the world, and then we're finding issues with them. And I'm sorry, canned good is not the best food. Fresh food is always the best food. And that's how we were raised, you know? So we raise our cows, we raise our livestock, we buksai them, and then we have a big, nice pot of kaddu. You know, so everything is all about eating better and eating healthier. We have a lot of ailments in our community because canned goods or processed foods and what is it, GMOs that come in are really affecting the health of our people. We can't live long if we're going to be
I think
depending on
people
those,
are starting
so
to realize this, you know, that the importance of sustainability,
organic, local,
and you know, and supporting it shows in our communities that we are, you know, we're moving towards that, and it's really nice to see this happening, and it's for a pandemic to have to show this. It's unfortunate, but you know, it's a realization.
yes.
As I said.
Okay.
Thank you. That's definitely important. I mean, the pandemic did highlight a lot of the things that were happening in Guam, and we have seen our community come together and sort of rally around each other to give food to people. We do have a distribution center. I know there's one in Tiden where they give out food packages for people if they want to come. The one over at SKC, you can help support local farmers, and that's, I mean, for our farmers will definitely be our way to kind of survive a pandemic, right? They're the ones who know how to grow our food. they're the ones who know Guåhan's land the best and kind of what crops work with our land without damaging it. So thank you for that. Another question that came in was, have you tried connecting to Congressman St. Nicholas? He seemed like he'd be a lot of help in this. And I know, Leo, you may have some insight with this, and then Sam too, because of your work with the Fanogi Coalition. I know Congressman St. Nicholas was one of the people that the letter was addressed to, in addition to our legislature and to our Maga'låhi.
Yeah, I think, generally Independent Guåhan reaches out to many local elected officials, such as our senators, our congressmen, but we also reach out to international bodies, such as going to the UN. And so we're always engaging in dialogues with elected officials at almost every level that you can think of, both the local and global levels. And just recently, in our correspondences with the Fanogi Coalition, we have an overwhelming support by the community. Over 750 people have signed the petition, and we have over 36 groups that are encouraging, that are asking our leaders to support Chamorro self-determination. And I think we've gotten an unusual reception by the congressman. We have yet to hear back from the congressman with little to actually none formal statements from the congressman about Chamorro self-determination, which is actually quite unusual, given that the community has displayed an overwhelming concern and a call for action about Chamorro self-determination.
So we can reaching out again. I mean, I know it's kind of hard to get to our legislators at the time because they're dealing with a lot of other things going on, but we'll reach out, we'll keep reaching out, and like Leo was saying, it's kind of this ongoing process. We're gonna have to find ourselves doing it over and over again, and kind of to just remind people about what's going on and to get the support of our legislators. So another question that came in, and this one I actually might combine with a question, is somebody had put, if we support breaking away from the US, should everyone in your group not take any stimulus money? Tear it up with your passport if you are so passionate. And someone also asked about support in independence. So if we get support from those students, if they knew, it would mean no more federal aid. So one thing about our status that kind of makes it really tricky is, as Senor Laguana had said, when we signed the Organic Act, it was pretty much one hand, or they were holding our hands along with us. And so it really limited the way that we were able to set up our economy, as Sam had said. And so another thing that brings us to is federal and international money. So because we're a territory, it makes it very hard for us to lobby for federal money, because as we saw when the stimulus checks came in, there was a provision with Guam saying that we couldn't actually distribute the money in a timely manner because we didn't have unemployment set up correctly, and the federal government decided that until all these things were in place, Guam would not be able to give out these checks. So we actually had our checks coming in maybe 2-3 weeks later than the rest of the United States. And that's quite unfortunate because many of our people needed those checks. They needed them immediately. They needed them as soon as the bill passed through Congress, but we had to wait a lot longer than the rest of the US. Another thing too that really limits us is because we're a territory, we're under the umbrella of the United States. And so because of that, we can't seek international aid. Guam, although we don't make as much money as the other states, we don't have a lot of money coming in from the federal government, especially in terms of reimbursement money for medical care and education. And that question was asking about education and federal funds. The unfortunate thing is that we spend more money for things that the federal government should be reimbursing us for, and we only get about 10% of that reimbursement back. So a lot of our money is kind of going out, whereas it should be coming in, and the federal government, if it does kind of keep to that agreement, Guam wouldn't have to keep kind of shuffling money around so that GDOE is able to keep our classrooms functional and able to give our students updated resources. So in terms of international aid, like I said, the United States is one of the wealthiest nations in the world. And because of that, other nations don't come to its aid. They don't think, oh, the United States needs federal or needs international money. And so Guam doesn't get a piece of that. But if Guam were to be independent, they would sort of assess Guam's financial portfolio on its own. And then that's when we can seek to other nations and ask them, hey, we want to do this for our healthcare infrastructure. We want to build up our education. Would you be willing to give us a grant that your community or that your country is willing to give out? And then here in Guam, we can develop those as well. So it's really our territorial status that makes it really hard to do that. So it's not as easy as someone saying, I support decolonization, therefore I don't want the stimulus money. The reality is we live in a territory, so it's very hard for us to continue to function and be economically sustainable because we don't have the means to do so. I don't know if anybody else on the panel wants to add on to that, but I know this was a question that comes up, especially because economy is a huge thing, especially with COVID-19. We're seeing that a lot of countries are struggling right now to reopen. And so as a result, they're making choices about the health of their community versus the health of their economy. Okay, so another question that came in is, someone had said, when those two ladies from Okinawa came a few years ago, I remember them saying how marvelous it was that so many young people are part of local movements. And they wanted to know, why is that? They said this isn't the time like when I was young. And so they said they were young in the 1960s, and they wanted to see if any of you might have an idea of what's changed. Many of you have been in this movement for a long time. And I mean, we all know movements have their ebbs and flows. And so if any of you have an idea of why is it now that more young people are starting to get involved and starting to get concerned about decolonization?
I can talk about that a little bit. I think for me, and I feel like for a lot of my peers in the movement, I think a lot of it is we came of age kind of in the backdrop of the US military buildup, and just observing what was going on in that period with the military being posed to take more land, and then us learning about kind of what would happen in terms of transferring a whole new population of soldiers here, and kind of the violence that had followed those soldiers in different communities that they had been stationed in was just really alarming. And I think that the military buildup has been a way for us to really understand that being a colony of the United States and our political relationship with the United States at this point just really makes us a target for a lot of these threats. I mean, just like within my own lifetime, thinking of the things that have happened is like learning about the military buildup, the threat that North Korea was going to bomb Guam, and just all of these kind of moments where it really hit me that our lives are continually in danger so long as we are a possession of the United States. And just even the other movements that have sprung up kind of in response to militarization, like looking at Prutayulitexin and how these places that we were growing up with in our youth, like I remember going there so many times as a kid and like learning that we won't be able to access that sacred land anymore. Like we won't be able to go to that beach anymore, or our access will be severely limited. Like these are all things that will really change our lives, in realizing that the island that I kind of grew up with, that has already changed so much and has been warped so much by militarization, is going to continue to change. So just what I've observed growing up with, and I think what so many of my peers have also observed, is that we're kind of in this tipping point where so much of our land has already been taken from us that we really need to put a lot more pressure to fight to keep what we have, and for what was taken from us to also be returned from us, if we're going to have any kind of future that's livable and sustainable for us. And I think all of that combined with climate change and climate chaos and like rising oceans, it's just like, for my generation now, we're seeing just the world shift so much around us that it's really just become this issue that if we don't fight for all of these things that we love, they will be gone, like within our lifetime or a little bit afterwards. And I think there's just so much urgency in realizing that the conditions of our lives are just rapidly changing and rapidly being endangered by the military and by our political status.
Speak on that too.
Oh,
I think the internet also plays a part in this. You know, a lot of times nobody knows about certain issues unless you actually live it, right? But now with the internet, everybody sees what's going on, you know, and it strikes nerves and it strikes chords in people, you know. It's now people are engaging in the issues that are happening. Chamoru, the diaspora too, you know. I think these platforms help with the movement, you know, spreading the word out.
Thank you. That's definitely true. We're seeing a lot more outreach now. I mean, people can access these things remotely. And so now we're seeing decolonization sort of take new forms and support for it taking new forms. And so going off of that, Untitled Guåhan and Mama Jill, you two very much embody the idea of this question. And so somebody had asked, I like the idea of organizing families. It makes it feel very specific, very local, and how can we build on that? And both of you, I mean, you come from families that are very well known for keeping cultural practices alive, for also emphasizing that culture be passed down to your children and also to people outside of your familial unit. And so the two of you I know have taken on mentorships with other young people in Guam. A lot of us can see work done by students that have gone through your mentorships with both of you. And so if both of you can speak to that and how can we build on the idea of organizing families around decolonization?
Yes, sir. Ti fan lolo zeng sina from Chamoru talu sego. Mas linguagem assim mas filme para agora taza agora no todo se man hobin né estigi net no mami Basangonem do na anima ma formas e como te a mami neste garden na reunion ai sa man mumusung esti mas hopin na subinu za guiza gume hilului komitea za lami med good esti na part good za guiza kum no tsumotso gui cheso guiza no o fashion ge esta ni gapna leku Orsini manali ni zata usai zoom zata fan ali zata quantos mas por I nun ita zautunga na lami man megegi na man hobin ifa maguon man malak suzu todo sa man anai stigi pa besangan loki anai maktu festpak gizagwa man mata todi samor man hujung todo zabali todo I cultura audition Chamoru man mas preciso de mafanui todo já para patafan banidoso na mali outro na Nasion na cultura lenga lami lo que sa si man bet good lo que Chamoru ni cultura za ni lingua já zigi lo que na aneman maktu festpak ni man magmata todo man hobi dan todo lo que Guam azige babashaman
With the creation of Second Chamoru, the purpose of the center was actually to create space for everyone to learn about our ancestors, to learn about art forms and kind of also informing them about the issues. So when we have visitors, there's a lot of visitors who come and actually want to know a lot about the island and what are we doing, and in a sense, we're trying to educate them in that sense. So with artifacts, we have of course, the museum, and we try to do apprenticeship programs to kind of help them build on something that they can connect to. I mean, if you try new skills, and then that is a way of also learning about, your history, your culture, and what's valued in our peoples, and to give them sense of pride and belonging to a people that can, and you know, just spreading the word. I mean, we spread the word all over the world that we are not one massive military base. We are actually people here of the land, and that we deserve to be heard. And with this modern technology now, it's easier now to have all of these issues go out to the world. And with you younger generations being up at the center, learning and connecting with our manamkos up there, because we are all manamkos up there right now, and we're waiting for your generations to kind of take over that, sharing knowledge and sharing the idea of being proud of who you are and not ashamed like it was in the past. You know, you have to be what, well, I don't want to go into that side. Let's just leave it at that.
Thank you. Actually, the next couple of questions are for Mama Jill and Amber. Someone actually wants to know, it's great that you kind of left off on that, because someone in the States was asking how can they support SKC? They want to know how they can get involved and make sure that you know, everybody is able to get funding and kind of even political support if you need something like that. And then they all, another question came in also asking, how do you think maybe Uncle Ed would guide us with his wisdom through this global pandemic? I mean, it's something that not many of us have not experienced. And so it seems that it's a very chaotic moment. And so Uncle Ed would, if you have any thoughts of how he'd be able to kind of ground all of us at this time, someone, but you know, we'd like for you to share that.
Okay, regarding the center, I'm actually really the Tantabu. So this is my boss, so she will take over.
You know, the center, our mission at the center is to perpetuate and preserve culture, traditional practices. Right now, the center is guided through the labor of love, you know, volunteers that are up there, give love to the center all the time. You can reach out to us. We do have a Facebook and Instagram page. We do have an email address that is also linked onto those pages, and just link up with us, connect with us to see, you know, how you can assist us. We're always open for new people to come up to the center and learn about the center and just kind of give love to the center. And what was that, friend? What was that about Tata? How would he?
They were asking about how he would kind of guide us during the global pandemic.
It's kind of hard because both he and I are not technical of all of this new age gadgets. So
you know, I don't know.
I think we actually did pretty well considering, you know, I've never tried anything like this. This is actually new for me. Yeah. I'm not that old with the ancient times when they brought the sailors in or whatever to infect all of us. And, you know, most of us passed away, but this is new, but he knows the history of that one. And I'm glad that, you know, we put our, at least Maga'låhi put her, you can be here, but you got to be somewhere, not within the communities like in the past. And I think we did very well. We didn't have too much.
Yeah. I think that he would definitely face head on that issue with the sailors coming in.
Yeah.
Regardless
of the pandemic.
The people were the health of our people is very important.
Yes.
So I think he would have had something to say.
Oh no, he would have a stink.
Yeah. You know, I look and, oh my gosh, what would he do during certain things, certain times? Like, what would he have done? Or how would he have felt or reacted when he saw over 2,000 people march in the Finogi March? You know, I always keep that in the back of my mind. And I think, gosh, he would.
I think what's going on already with the young generations, I think he would have been really, really proud of all of you guys doing what you're doing now and reaching out to the world through all this modern technology.
I know it. We had this COVID-19 pandemic really did highlight a lot of the problems that were going on, especially with the Theodore Roosevelt. In a lot of ways, that did highlight the fact that Guam didn't get a say in the way it would handle something like that, right? It was orders that came down to us, and then the Maga'låhi just kind of had to scramble and figure out how we were going to do this. Guam didn't get a real chance to tell the admiral, like, hey, I don't think it's safe to put 2,000 people on our shores, and kind of how would we go about doing that? Where would we put them? Is there somewhere on the base we can put them? It was a very short conversation, and I think that's what frustrated a lot of people, is that Guam wasn't able to really voice its concerns in a timely manner, and we were given a very short window of time to even say that we were concerned. And so going off of that, we did actually get a question about the sailors. Someone asked, what did Guam get from taking in the sailors from the Theodore Roosevelt? And then someone also asked, what would you say in response to people saying Guam will just be reoccupied by another country if we separate from the US? Leo, I don't know if you want to speak to that, especially
yeah, sure.
about Guam's strategic location in regards to that, and CR kind of highlighted that.
Yeah, I think, with the USS Theodore Roosevelt battleship that came to Guam and actually quarantined on Guam, this particular case study offers us a very interesting look about how the COVID-19 pandemic plays out in America's colonies. And so I know that, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, the captain of the ship, had actually sounded the alarms on the vessel that the COVID-19 was spreading amongst sailors. And so in the national headlines, the narrative became that the vessel became the embodiment of the US military's attack on COVID, influence on COVID, response on COVID. The ship really became the centerpiece of a discussion about COVID-19's impact on the military, and showing this susceptibility narrative on the vessel. And I guess if we were to take an analysis on that from a perspective back home, we see that in this context, the colonial realities of Guam actually are prime. Like it displays in a very perfectly way in exactly how it's meant to operate, and that Guam in this whole national discussion becomes an afterthought. When it was in the New York Times, it was simply stated, Guam's mentioning was simply stated that the vessel docks in Guam and is quarantined in Guam. There's no mention about the civilian population. There's no mention about any of our elected officials having any commentary about the docking of the ship and the susceptibility of the contagion spreading throughout our civilian population. And so if we were to look at the case study of the battleship within our colonial settings, we actually find that Guam, unlike any other US jurisdiction, perhaps with the exception of the other territories, we have faced quite an unusual predicament, quite an unusual expectation here, where all of a sudden the civilian government of Guam is expected to care and aid for the US military in quite an unprecedented fashion. And so if we see in the national headlines, the military's role within the continental United States in Alaska and Hawaii is that of an aiding military. And so we've seen that the military sent hospital ships to New York City, to LA, to alleviate these major metropolitans that will be experiencing the brunt of the contagion and of the chaos of this whole pandemic. However, when we look at Guam and the US military's position in Guam, we find an actual counter expectation here, where all of a sudden the civilian population of Guam is suddenly expected to care for and aid for the US military. So we actually find there's a paradoxical relationship here happening where in any other US jurisdiction in the continental United States, the US military is expected to aid civilian populations. In Guam, we find that an unprecedented, almost crazy, ludicrous thought that the civilian population is all of a sudden aiding the US military. And you know, we can get into the nit and grits of perhaps what our local officials were thinking, the decisions that were made, the rationales, but I think the prevailing narrative here that a civilian population such as our island is all of a sudden expected to aid and assist the US military should really be troubling. It should really be questioning why is that the case? Because it really elucidates our entire colonial status. You know, we are a colony that is dutiful, that is patriotic, that, you know, in times of crisis, we are expected, we are assumed to care and assist for the US military to assist the United States in their time of need and crisis. However, you know, we can point to so many points where the opposite of that relationship has never been the case for us and our moments of crisis and our moments of need.
Thanks, Leo. I know that was, you know, that whole incident, it kind of brought a lot of confusion to our community and made it really hard for people to kind of get more information around the topic, especially when the testing came out. It was really hard for us to get the numbers initially. And then all of a sudden we saw like this large rise in number of soldiers that were testing positive. And so just to end the GA, because we are actually running out of time, the last couple of questions, I know Sam, you may want to speak to them. They're asking, has IG ever considered teaching farming or gardening? And then they're also asking, how can the indigenous food sovereignty movement be a way to emphasize intergenerational activism?
Yeah, those are great questions and things to think about. Within IG, we've done a lot of work to help people reconnect with our land and foreground how important those relationships are. We have a Haleta hike series where we bring people on hikes to some sites that are important in our cultural heritage. We also take people to Hua every year. So we do take these initiatives that are really important for helping people continue to maintain relationships with our land. And I think a lot of this work just gains a lot more meaning when we're able to be in relationship with our sacred sites and visit them. In terms of starting a garden, it's not something that we're thinking about doing right now, but I mean, I think it's also something that we can look at into doing for the future. I think the great thing about being on an island and also just about us is like, if you have an idea, it's very possible that you can go out and make that happen. Like just connect with us or other people in the community, do it with a group of your own friends. I think just like there are so many great ideas and things that people want to see, and our community, I think, is intimate enough and supportive enough that it's really possible for people to just make these ideas realities in our communities themselves. But it's also something that we're down to do if people want to come forward and partner with us. And then also just within our own families, like decolonization really does begin at home. A lot of us, I think, are trying to be really a lot more thoughtful about eating food that's grown locally. There's a lot of opportunities, like people were mentioning earlier, about supporting our local farmers. So yeah, I think a lot of this is in individual actions that people can take within our families too.
Thanks, Sam. That definitely speaks to today's theme, because a lot of questions that we often get are, how do we involve ourselves in decolonization, and kind of what are methods that we can take part of to get more involved. And so thank you all for being here, and we thank you for taking the time out to share your ideas and to sort of share your own histories and how your families have all come together to fight for decolonization. And so just a reminder, so we're still having our annual Songs of Freedom. However, we're going to do an on-air concert. It'll be July 4th at 7 p.m. And you can check out our Facebook page for any updates. And then also we'll be sharing out the flyer that you all see there. It's a beautiful illustration. And also we'll have our next online General Assembly on June 25th at 4 p.m. and it'll be at the same place. So we hope to see you all there. Thank you for joining in.